Anna felt a deep sense of unease as she walked towards her newly purchased house on a quiet morning. The old house, located on the outskirts of the town, had been abandoned for years. The marks left by the passage of time were evident through the peeling plaster, rotting wood, and rusted metal parts. However, Anna found peace in such places. Bringing a forgotten piece of the past back to life had become a passion for her. When she inserted the key into the old, heavy iron door and turned it, the creaking sound echoed through the empty walls of the house. As the door slowly opened, the musty odor from inside stung her nose. Yet this smell only motivated Anna further, rather than deterring her. The house was a treasure that had been untouched for years, and Anna was determined to uncover it. Stepping inside, she noticed the thick layer of dust accumulated over the years. The windows let in only a faint beam of sunlight. The living room was spacious and empty, with walls covered in faded wallpaper, and an old fireplace standing in the corner. Anna approached the fireplace and looked at the shelves above it. Something caught her attention. One of the shelves looked older and heavier than the others. When she touched the shelf, she felt a slight vibration. As she ran her fingers over the heavy wood, she discovered a small compartment hidden behind it. Slowly, she reached into this compartment and pulled out a dust-covered object. It was an old, round mantel clock. Its gold edges were rusted, and the glass was cracked. Yet the clock's hands still seemed to carry the weight of time. As Anna held the clock, she felt a strange warmth emanating from it. The clock was oddly heavy, as if made not just of metal but of memories from the past and perhaps a curse. The hands of the clock twitched slightly, and for a moment, Anna thought the clock had moved. But she quickly dismissed this thought from her mind. "I'm just tired," she murmured to herself. She examined the clock in surprise, thinking it might still be working. On the bottom, there was an almost invisible inscription. She read it carefully. "Do not be a slave to time." Anna couldn't make sense of this inscription, but she felt something was wrong. There was an invisible darkness surrounding the clock, and she sensed that even touching it might be a trap. However, her curiosity suppressed these warnings, and she carefully placed the clock back. She set it among the other pieces of her antique collection to examine it in detail later. As she spent the day cleaning the house, the clock remained in the back of her mind. The clock's peculiarity, its manipulation of time, and the strange warning had begun to occupy her thoughts. While cleaning the dust in the house's dark corners, she felt as if she might hear the clocks ticking at any moment. However, the clock was silent, at least for now. When night fell, Anna lay down to sleep in her new house for the first time. At that moment, she realized that the clock was still on her mind. Before closing her eyes, she seemed to hear a whisper in her subconscious. "Do not be a slave to time." But her fatigue prevented her from focusing on it, and she fell into a deep sleep. However, that night, the darkness trapped within the clock began to slowly seep into Anna's world. Anna felt a strange sensation when she woke up the next morning. As she opened her eyes, she noticed that the light streaming through the bedroom window was much brighter than usual. When she turned her head slightly, she saw that the clock read 11:45. As someone who usually wakes up early, waking up this late seemed odd to her. Moreover, despite sleeping so long, her body felt tired, and her mind was foggy. After getting up and washing her face, she started wandering around the house. The place, which had seemed somewhat familiar during her cleaning the previous night, now felt even more alien. The room doors seemed heavier, the stairs steeper. Trying to shake these feelings from her mind, she quickly went to the kitchen and made herself a coffee. However, while drinking her coffee, she noticed the clock on the kitchen table. It was the old clock she had found the day before. She didn't remember putting it there. She had no recollection of bringing it to this spot. Yet there it was, right in the middle of the table. It was as if it had taken its place for breakfast with her in the mornings. Anna hesitated for a moment. Her heart began to race. As she reached for the clock, she saw the hands move for an instant. She was sure she hadn't been mistaken this time. She pulled her hand back and took a few steps away. A faint ticking sound started to rise from the clock, as if a very old mechanism was coming back to life. This sound filled Anna with unease. "The coffee must be affecting you," she murmured to herself. Yet, as she saw the clock's hands shifting slightly before her eyes, her discomfort grew. Then suddenly, the ticking stopped. The room fell into silence. The clock's hands pointed at 3 o'clock and stopped there. At that moment, all the lights in the house suddenly went out. Everything was plunged into darkness in the blink of an eye. Anna panicked for a moment. She tried to find the clock by feeling around the table with her hands. Just as she touched it, the darkness within the house deepened. She realized the room she was in had disappeared, replaced by a cold, stone chamber. She found herself in a dark room surrounded by old stone walls. There was a heavy, suffocating smell in the air. Her heart began to race wildly. "How is this possible?" she whispered. She extended her hands in front of her to find her way, but each step drew her deeper into the darkness. Suddenly, she felt a movement behind her. When she turned, she saw a silhouette emerging from the darkness. The silhouette was a grotesquely distorted humanoid figure. Its face was covered in circular lines like the clock, and its hands were long and skeletal. As the figure approached Anna, its footsteps echoed on the stone floor. With each step, Anna's terror grew. She tried to run, but her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. As the figure came closer, the darkness in its eyes began to penetrate Anna. For a moment, she felt as if she had returned to a memory from the past. A dark night, a traffic accident, shattered glass, the deafening sound of a collision. And then she returned to the present. "This can't be real," Anna screamed, her voice echoing off the empty walls. But when the figure touched her, the cold and pain she felt were real. Her mind clouded over, and she was engulfed by darkness. Anna, lying on the floor, struggled to manage the swirling thoughts in her mind. As she looked at the crack on the clock, her fear grew. The clock was no longer just an object. It felt as if it was a living, breathing entity. Even touching it seemed like being pulled into a trap. As she stood up, she felt aches throughout her body. She hadn't yet shaken off the effects of the strange events of the night. She brought her hand to her head, and when she noticed the blood between her fingers, she gasped. For a moment, her mind was engulfed in darkness, but she quickly pulled herself together. She rushed away from the clock, grabbing a cloth from the kitchen and wiping the blood from the cut on her forehead. Reaching for her phone, she decided to call Michael. "I can't handle this alone any longer," she thought. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. After a few rings, Michael's voice came through. "Anna, are you okay? You sound terrible." "Michael." Anna's voice was trembling. "You need to come here right away. Something is terribly wrong in this house." Michael responded without hesitation. "Of course, I'm coming right away. Hold on, Anna. I'm on my way." After ending the call, Anna's eyes drifted back to the clock on the table. The clock continued to tick as if it sensed her weakness. She didn't want to look at it any longer. She turned to leave the kitchen, but the moment she stepped out, the entire atmosphere of the house changed. For a moment, everything became blurred. The walls, the furniture, everything seemed to be wavering. Anna quickened her pace, but no matter how fast she ran, the layout of the house didn't change. She realized she was stuck in the same room. The doors were closing in on her, and the walls were narrowing. It felt as though the house itself was trapping her. Her breathing quickened, and panic engulfed her. She heard the ticking sound of the clock again. This time it was louder and more resonant, filling the entire house. The ticking sound was pounding into her brain, as if it was tearing through her eardrums. She covered her ears with her hands, but the sound persisted. On the contrary, it grew more intense. Eventually, amidst the ticking, she heard another sound. It was a familiar whisper. "Do not become a prisoner of time." The voice was clear and distinct this time. Overwhelmed by fear and helplessness, Anna collapsed to the floor. Suddenly, everything went dark. When Michael arrived at Anna's house, he found the door wide open. There was no sound coming from inside, which immediately alarmed him. He rushed in, calling out Anna's name as he searched through the rooms. The silence that permeated the house was almost suffocating. Upon reaching the living room, he found Anna unconscious on the floor. He quickly ran to her and started shaking her. "Anna, wake up! What happened to you?" His heart raced with fear. When Anna opened her eyes, she initially thought she was still in that dark room. Seeing Michael's worried face, she was momentarily disoriented. "Michael," she whispered. Her voice was weak and fragile. Michael carefully helped Anna to her feet. "What happened here? Finding you like this terrified me." Anna tried to gather her thoughts and began to explain what had happened. The strange movements of the clock, the changing atmosphere in the house, and the moments when she felt trapped. Michael thought the story sounded crazy, but the terror in Anna's eyes left him with no choice but to believe her. "You shouldn't handle that clock again, Anna. There's definitely a curse involved," Michael said, looking at the clock. Anna nodded. "But there's something in that clock. It feels like it's pulling me in, making it impossible to escape." Michael sat Anna down on a chair to rest. "Perhaps we need to investigate the clock and its story more deeply. We can't do anything without understanding it better." Anna was still shaken by the fear she had experienced, but Michael's determination gave her some reassurance. "Okay, but how? Where do we start?" Michael focused on the clock. "First, we need to show this clock to an expert. We need to learn more about its past. Maybe we can find out how to break this curse." At that moment, the clock began ticking once more. This time, the sound was even more intense and menacing. The crack on the clock was starting to widen, as if something trapped inside was trying to escape. As Michael reached for the clock, he paused for a moment. "Anna, are you ready? We have to do this." Anna fixed her gaze on the crack in the clock. "Yes, we must. I refuse to be a slave to this clock." Michael carefully took the clock and placed it in a bag. At that instant, the lights in the house flickered back on, and the ticking sound ceased. Everything seemed to return to normal, but Anna knew this silence was the calm before the storm. After Michael and Anna carefully placed the clock into the bag, they set off immediately. It was clear that this matter could not be postponed any longer. The clock's influence had extended beyond the confines of the house, deeply affecting Anna's mind. Michael decided to take the clock to an antique dealer, hoping to find an expert who could shed light on its past. Inside the car, there was a heavy silence until they reached the city center. Anna stared out the window, lost in thought. Her eyes were fixed on the street lamps passing by rapidly, but with each lamp post she passed, she felt as though she heard the ticking sound again. It was a sound echoing in her mind, growing increasingly intense. "Michael," she whispered, though she could barely find her voice. Michael noticed the silence too. "Anna, don't worry. We'll do everything we can to solve the mystery of this clock. If we learn what it is, we can fight it." When they arrived at the antique shop, it was filled with old items. As they walked among dusty books, old paintings, and broken furniture, the shop's owner, an elderly man with lines around his eyes reflecting years of experience, approached them. "How can I help you?" he asked, eyeing the bag Michael was holding with caution. Michael took out the clock and handed it to the man. "We're having some problems with this clock. What do you know about its history?" The man took the clock and examined it carefully. When his eyes traveled over the crack, concern appeared on his face. "This is no ordinary clock," he muttered. "It's very old and has a dark past. Such clocks were created with powers that could manipulate time itself. They hold trapped souls, and these souls try to emerge over time." Anna's hair stood on end. "So, what can we do? How do we stop this spirit?" The man took a deep breath. "The only way to stop the spirit is to destroy the clock. But it's not that simple. The clock will defend itself. Objects like this will use every method to avoid destruction. And time will work against you." Michael looked into Anna's eyes. "So, are we willing to take this risk? Is there no other way?" The man shook his head. "There is no other way. If this clock persists, it will endanger not just you, but everyone around you." Anna and Michael decided to destroy the clock. Following the man's instructions, they took the clock to an old ironworks. The abandoned factory perfectly matched the clock's mysterious atmosphere. Worn-out walls, dark corners, and the sharp scent of metal heightened the tension with every step. As they descended into the depths of the factory, Michael ignited the remaining coal in the furnace. As the flames grew, Anna's fear intensified. The ticking sound of the clock began to echo throughout the space. They could feel time bending and reality unraveling. Just as Michael was about to throw the clock into the fire, the air around them grew heavier. Grotesque figures with the same features as the clock emerged from the darkness. These beings blocked Anna and Michael's movements. Their bodies felt weighted down, as if a force trying to stop time had seized them. Gathering all his strength, Michael hurled the clock into the fire. As the clock fell into the flames, the ticking sounds turned into a scream. It was as if time itself was in agony. The spirit trapped within the clock fought against its annihilation with all its might. The factory began to tremble, and the floor cracked. Anna and Michael struggled to stay on their feet. Flames surrounded the clock, and its glass began to crack. For a moment, the world went dark. Finally, the clock exploded. A terrifying scream spread throughout the factory, and then everything stopped. The flames went out, and all activity in the factory ceased. Time seemed to return to its normal flow. Anna and Michael, lying on the floor, looked at each other. The factory was shrouded in darkness, and silence reigned once more. "Is it over?" Anna whispered, still trembling with fear. Michael approached her and held her arm. "I think it's over. The curse is finally gone." When Anna returned to her home, she noticed that everything had returned to normal. The ticking sound was gone, and time moved as it should. However, the experiences she had endured left a deep scar in her mind. As Michael said his final goodbye, he looked at her one last time. "Anna, it will be hard to forget what we've been through, but the important thing is that we survived. If anything happens again, please let me know." Anna nodded. "Thank you, Michael. I couldn't have done it without you." Michael hugged her and then left through the door. After closing the door behind him, Anna took a deep breath. They had escaped the trap of time. But even though the curse of the clock was gone, Anna knew that the marks it left on her would never be erased.